Okay. Good morning. Thank you for joining Happy Joseph's Journey. We are excited that you are here today for our second installment of our virtual education series. We are going to start. Miss Badon, I may need you to mute your YouTube side. All right. Okay, are we good to go? All right, so today our topic is understanding autism as a spectrum with our special guest, Miss Stacy Badon. My technical support, I'm still hearing feedback of the broadcast. So whoever is playing the YouTube segment, I need that device muted. All right. I think we're together now. I'm sorry. So, the mission statement of Happy Joseph's Journey is that we are a community of autism advocates that aim to offer inclusive opportunities to educate, empower, enrich, and celebrate individuals on the spectrum, their families, and their communities. So, we would like for you to join us on Happy Joseph's Journey. First, we need you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you go ahead and do that now. You should see the word subscribe in red letters. Just click it and you will be subscribed to our channel. You can follow us on Facebook at Happy Joseph's Journey, Instagram at Joseph's Journey, Twitter Happy Joseph's Joe1, and our website josephshappy.com. We thank you for all of the support you have given us and continue to do. And we just want to let you know that we appreciate you. Upcoming events that we are having for the month of March, we will have our virtual education series, part 3, planning for your child's future. If you have any questions about how to financially plan for your child's future, we have 3 young men who will be presenting on March the 13th, that is a Saturday, at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We have Marcus Johnson, who is a financial planner and also the founder of Johnson Capital LLC. We have Mr. Terrence Hope, who is an insurance and retirement advisor, and Mr. Marcus Shute, a sports and entertainment attorney. So if you have any questions you want to ask about things you can do to financially plan for your child's future, please be sure to join us on March 13th at 11 a.m. Central Time. Some upcoming events. The month of April is Autism Awareness Month. And we know that our 4 pillars are to educate, empower, enrich, and celebrate. So on April 2nd, World Autism Awareness Day, we want you to share and wear your Joseph's Journey t-shirt. There are about 5 different versions now. Just choose one, pick one, and just sport your t-shirt for that day. On April the 24th, we are going to have a Happy Joseph's Journey celebration, which will include an Autism Awareness Jeopardy game, a Zoom virtual background challenge, a merch contest. So if you do not have any Happy Joseph's Journey merchandise, you will have an opportunity to win. and a surprise guest appearance. I wonder who that could be. Also, for the month of April, we are going to have our newsletter will be starting again. We're going to have some autism trivia on our social media sites. Our guest spotlights, video clips, and book recommendations will all be offered during the month of April. If you have not already done so, please purchase your Happy Joseph's Journey t-shirt now. And you can do that on our website at josephshappy.com. We are only doing pre-orders for our new t-shirts, so those will be taken until March 15th. You can purchase that shirt on our website. I would like to introduce our board of directors. I am your president, Latanya Winfrey. Miss Allison Simpson is our vice president. Miss Ophelia Childress is our secretary. Miss Labrina Winfrey is our treasurer. Mr. James Morris is our marketing director. Spencer Rollins is our philanthropy ambassador. And Andre Waller is our special events coordinator. These are the people that make our events happen and spread the word about what's going on with our organization. So today, our guest speaker is Miss Stacy Badon. She began her career working as a speech language therapist in the public schools of South Louisiana. In 1998, she met her first student on the autism spectrum and immediately began the search for strategies specific to autism spectrum disorder. She quickly discovered her passion along with her purpose and immersed herself in the autism community. Along with over 10 years of professional experience as a speech therapist, she has obtained a Master of Psychology specializing in child development and completed training as a behavior analyst. She has also obtained certification as a sensory enrichment therapist. She currently supports families within the autism community, providing strategies for challenging behaviors while developing opportunities to increase their child's communication, as well as creating sensory activities specific to the needs of their individual child. Stacy provides educational training to daycare facilities while also providing virtual homeschool to several autistic students. In July of 2017, she returned from volunteering in Africa. During the 6-week stay, she provided training to educators, families, and local therapists in the country of Ghana. Stacy has presented at the 2017 Texas Autism Conference, as well as the World Autism Organization Conference in 2018. She is dedicated to working with families in the autism community throughout the states as well as globally. And she is very passionate about sharing knowledge and experience with others so that children and their families can reach their full potential. In April 2018, she was honored by the Perfect Connection nonprofit organization at their inaugural Autism Gala of Lights. She also serves on the Council Advisory as an executive committee member for the World Autism Organization, a global nonprofit dedicated to improving the quality of life for people with autism and their families around the world. She currently provides virtual autism parent coaching services to families in 14 different countries via her business, Everything Autism. She helps families with everything autism beyond the label. Our guest speaker for today is Miss Stacy Badon. Stacy, take it away. You're on mute.
Oh, there you go. Thank you so much. I sound very busy. And I just want to say that I appreciate your organization bringing information to everyone, right? Because this is a public venue and it's important. And this is actually my happy place, right? Working with nonprofits, just hanging out with parents and others in the community that want to learn because it's important. We have to build capacity. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to talk about understanding autism as a spectrum. And the reason this sort of title, instead of like, what is autism? I've changed this training because I learn more every day. And, doctors give a lot on, this is your child's level and 1, 2, 3, and all of that is for insurance purposes and medical, documentation. And I understand the need for that sort of number gauge, but autism is really a spectrum. It's not necessarily a level. And we'll talk a little bit about that because, and the reason that I think it's important for us to get this message out is because it's very disheartening when a doctor tells a parent, oh, your child's a level 3 or your child's a level 2. And it's like, okay, what does that mean? Like, I don't even know what autism is. And now you're telling me my child is here. And does that mean they can get here? And what does here mean? And so then you get stuck on trying to figure out where your child is with levels. And we lose sight of, let's look at the whole picture. Let's look at what your child needs individually, because the standard sort of like high functioning label, it's always assumed, oh, they don't need any strategies, they don't need any support, they're high functioning, they're fine, or oh, they're verbal, they're fine. It's like, no, there's a whole bunch sort of going on. So understanding that so that parents can look for resources that fit the needs of their kiddos. So let me share my screen. And I'm super excited because I have I've redone this training because, like I said, I learn, and then what is it Maya Angelou says? When you know better, you do better. And that is my goal every day, is to learn more. And let me see where the slideshow part is. Let me start that. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the concept of understanding autism as a spectrum, but at the same time, talk about autism, right? And understanding what that means when you get that diagnosis, right? What does that mean when your family member gets that diagnosis? What does that mean as a teacher? So we're going to talk about that. And one of the reasons that I started wanting to just get the word, get the message out and work with parents is because I was very frustrated with the fact that parents get a diagnosis, no one tells them what autism is. And I think this is unacceptable. I don't think that parents should be told, go to Google it. Autism is very specific. And parents need to understand their options, and they need to know where their support systems are or what support system they should get in place. When you get a diagnosis of, your child gets a diagnosis with juvenile diabetes, they bring you in a room, they explain to you about juvenile diabetes, they give you your options on different things that you can do. No one does this. And I'm not sure if it should be the responsibility of the doctors or the educators or the therapist, but someone should be taking that responsibility. And so I've always done that, working with children as a speech therapist, and I want more folks to do that, because when you're educated, you're empowered. When you know your options, then you can put together your support system and your therapies and everything that you need for your child's individual needs. So autism spectrum disorder, and I've learned some new things yesterday in a webinar, and so I'm actually going to end up changing the disorder, but this is something I got from a document, so it's here now still. But when you think about autism spectrum disorder, it's a neurological brain-based difference, right? Which, we all know it's neurological based. If any of you have seen my post, I am always periodically reminding everyone that autism is not a behavior disorder. I repeat, it is not a behavior disorder. Our children are not choosing to demonstrate inappropriate behaviors because they just want to. They are demonstrating some behaviors that appear inappropriate or present as inappropriate because They have maybe communication is sort of like in the way, or there's sensory overload. There's so many things that are going on. But the basic sort of, three general things that we sort of look at is that speech language communication component, right? And that looks different for every child. It looks different from a child not being able to necessarily communicate primarily with verbal words, but pictures or an AAC device or technology on our phones. There's so many things that we have access to that we did not have access to 20 years ago when I started researching and trying to learn how I could help my students. The other component is the social. And, this is where our kiddos just get tagged, right? As like, misbehaving, oh, they're emotionally disturbed. Oh, they need to go into behavior class, or, oh, they can't stay here for whatever reason the schools make up, or a restaurant or any other place makes up. And it's that social behavior that we know are some markers in terms of a diagnosis, but those are things that our kiddos are struggling with, right? Children, teens, adults. And we'll talk about what that looks like and how that presents in our kiddos. And maybe we can do a follow-up training with the organization on maybe some strategies. That's something that I would thoroughly enjoy, of course. And the other component that I feel is not addressed enough is the motor planning and coordination. Yes, there is the sensory component. Any one of you who have seen my videos, heard me speak, or you have talked to me personally, I'm a sensory enrichment therapist. It's all about the sensory. I mean, I can't tell you enough how the sensory integration makes such a difference in how our kiddos navigate their environment. And it's so critical for us to understand their needs and what works for our kiddos. But the motor planning and coordination is that part that is not addressed enough. And that's where, parents are not given the information that you should get an occupational therapist on board, right? Whether it's for sensory, fine motor, motor planning. Oftentimes I've, met with parents and they're having this challenging behavior, or their child won't do their homework, or they won't write their name. And it's like, oh my gosh, he just won't, he won't. And then when I look at the child, and ask the question, oh, are they receiving occupational therapy? Has anyone looked at midline crossing? Has anyone addressed their, possible retained primitive reflexes? These are terminologies that should be introduced to parents and educators, because it impacts how our children navigate their day. And it's tough when someone's asking you to do something that you just can't. It's not that you don't want, but it's perceived by usually the adult that you just are not being compliant. And that's really frustrating for our kiddos, teens and adults. All right. So how does autism impact, impact child, teen, adult, but specifically thinking in terms of when you get a diagnosis, or you've had a diagnosis and you're still learning because resources are lacking, or there's just so much to learn, and our children grow and develop and things change. Autism impacts a child in terms of it covers a spectrum of skills. And there are lots of similarities, but everyone is their own unique individual, just like those of us who are not autistic. And I put this line here because, yes, I do use the word autistic. I started in education long time ago with child with autism, and I understand why. But over the last years, I have transitioned to use both, because I have many autistic colleagues and many autistic friends, and that is their preference. So I try to make sure that I'm balancing for everyone's comfort zone, but also everyone can choose their own terminology. This is free choice still, I think. All right, so communication. And the reason I have communication at the top in terms of how this impacts our children is because it's not about the behaviors. It is so about not being able to communicate your needs and wants. Your child is frustrated, you're frustrated because you don't know how to communicate if your child is not giving back a verbal statement, or your child doesn't know how to communicate because they maybe can't find the word, or they don't have a way to communicate with pictures, or their words are not coming out as effectively or quickly and efficiently. So communication is really, really important. Speaking from someone who is in a place where English is a second language, and the reason I'm here is to become a proficient, hopefully, Spanish speaker, so that I don't have to have translators when I work with my Spanish speaking families. It's tough when I go out and I don't have the words, right? I understand that. And if anyone's ever traveled, it's really frustrating when you can't ask for something simple like the bathroom, or where to get water, or, can you tell me where the rice is in the grocery store, right? It's very, very frustrating. But I am able to find other ways, right? Because I have options. But for a child, sometimes there's no option. So the option is pulling, kicking, pushing, grabbing, right? Because it's like, I don't know what else to do. So communication is super, super important, which of course I'm partial as a speech therapist. Instead of doctors saying, this is what the doctors do, they give that piece of paper and say, your child has autism, go and find ABA, right? Okay, that's great, but I'd like to have speech therapy because communication is so important. All right, in terms of the other things that impact, and we'll go into each of these a little bit more in depth so that you can understand that spectrum capacity of autism. And the social behavior, those repetitive behaviors, right? I have a mom, I was in a coaching session, and she is just at her wit's end because her child is tapping, right? Tapping, and it's just repetitive tapping, 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 tapping. And for her child, this is a way for him to regulate, right? He needs that in order to stay and process that environment that he's in. But for mom, it's like, oh, I just can't take it, right? So the solution is understanding, and this is not necessarily part of the training or the webinar presentation, but just to give you a little insight, the compromise is we understand her child needs that right now in that environment while he is either listening to his teacher or in a speech therapy virtual session or whatever is going on at the time. And that is how he manages to regulate and process in that environment. But for the other person, it's really very difficult. So mom wears earplugs so that the tapping doesn't bother her, and everybody gets what they need for that particular time. Just a simple example in terms of it's a difference, right? It's a need in order to process the environment. And we do understand that we have to find the balance. Same, in terms of the social behavior, those are the struggles that parents have in terms of, wanting to have their kids sort of, play on the playground, right? And sometimes kids are interested and sometimes they're not. Lots of times our kiddos do want to interact and play. But it's that communication that's in the way. It's right. How do I ask to play? That social pragmatic part of language. And that's the impact that presents as all of these behaviors, right? My child stays on the side. That's what we see, but it's the underlying component of the impact of autism. And the challenges with motor planning, transitioning, order of tasks, auditory sequencing, coordination. There's a lot to process when someone says something simple like, go get your shoes. That is motor planning. I have to pull my hand up. I have to touch the shoe and get it at the right height. I've got to put my hands together. What did she say? Get my shoes and where do I put them? Lots of stuff going on. So if your motor planning is not addressed, if someone's not aware of that you are having struggles with auditory sequencing and they have not provided those visual supports, it looks like non-compliance to the rest of us, right? Which is the umbrella of the whole behavior component. Those differences in sensory processing, huge impact. That's a whole different training, webinar / life lessons and experiences to learn, but I will address that a little bit in this presentation. So those are the four sort of very, very basic, right? In terms of like, if we look at the spectrum, and I'll have some visuals for you guys to see some more components as well. All right, so if we look at the speech and language component, it's really that communication, right? It's all about communicating, and communicating is important, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. We have to be open to different ways of our children communicating while we are building maybe some verbal speech, right? While we are building using an AAC device, we need to make sure that our kiddos have a way to communicate. So, and the impact as far as how that impacts our kiddos, some children have, verbal speech delays, right? And it looks different for every kiddo. Some kiddos, it's verbal, verbal disappears, verbal comes back once we start working on some strategies within a therapy setting or at home. That social engagement, right? What does that look like when it comes to that speech and language and conversation and playing on the playground or wanting to go to the birthday party, or when we have a holiday, why is, not wanting to socially engage? A lot of times there's a bunch of different components involved, right? But that communication part, those of us who are proficient communicators, and I will say that I am quite a communicator. Luckily, I was able to find a career path that matched something I kind of naturally did. I've always been a talker, but I have had to learn, even outside of autism, communication, social engagement, conversation, back and forth is a struggle for many people. Sometimes we say they're introverts, but several folks maybe struggle with having conversations or long social engagements, not wanting to go to big events, and we accept that. So we need to think about our kiddos who are sort of navigating that frustration of maybe that's not something they're most comfortable with, right? And giving them options. But the social engagement is an impact, and it can be frustrating from the parent perspective as well as from the autistic person's perspective, especially if it's a child that really wants to get in that mix of play, but they just don't know how, or it's too much sensory overload. So it's safer to stay in this sensory environment over here. Echolalia. Echolalia is wonderful. It is useful. Long, long time ago, when we didn't know any better, we thought it was not good. We tried to get rid of it. We tried to stop it. It is very beneficial. It is a building foundation for verbal communication. And there are ways that you can shape echolalia, for lack of a better words, into purposeful communication. And if you really listen and observe, and it's hard to do when you're in the mix. So sometimes if you can catch yourself on video, or someone can catch you on video with your kiddo, or you watch them in a therapy session, their echolalia really is purposeful. We just have to look and watch and see how they're using it in order to process information. Another component that's impacted in regards to speech language, communication umbrella, is that pragmatic language skills. And this is where our older children or young adults get into trouble, if you want to call it that, at school or maybe in the community, because no one has helped them understand how to socially navigate the pragmatic rules that we have decided, right? We just decided on those rules. We decided that boys ask girls out to a dance, right? Now we've changed that a little bit, but somebody decided that. And there are lots of other things that we've decided, right? We've decided that we wait till someone finishes talking before we respond, right? That's part of our pragmatic language rules. Our kids sometimes struggle with picking up on that sort of naturalistically, right? It can be very confusing. And we, I say we, those of us who are not diagnosed with autism, we have a lot of inconsistencies in regards to pragmatic social skills, a lot of gray area, right? A lot of abstract things and rules that we have decided upon. And for someone who's autistic, that is a very concrete thinker, it's not made very clear. So those are things where, let's say, I've worked with students that their intent is they like a girl. They should, if they're interested in girls and they're 15 and, oh, I like a girl, and they go to the girl and say, hi, I like you. Will you be my girlfriend? And the girl says no. And the autistic teen doesn't understand, because in his concrete frame of thinking, if I like her, she should like me, and I don't understand, right? And so then that turns into, sometimes it appears to be stalking, or they perseverate on trying to get the girl to agree. And it's just because they're not understanding that social pragmatic rule that it doesn't work that way. The other person has to agree, right? And the other person has to like you. And that can be kind of tough sometimes for our kiddos. But that's where the speech therapist should be addressing those things when they are in elementary school. And this is something that I educate parents on in terms of, when they say, oh, they don't need speech anymore because, oh, they're communicating just fine, we're done. Ask them about pragmatic language skills. Ask them about those things, because those are the things that later come into play, especially when our children are a little bit more independent socially. They're going and doing things without as much supervision as when they are younger. All right, which goes into the social behavior, right? And this is my favorite part, because I am determined, hopefully I live another 20, at least 20, 25 years, I'm determined to shift the mindset of the expectations for social behavior in terms of understanding and accepting our neurodiverse autistic individuals out in our communities. Because just because we have decided this is not what should be done, or we are uncomfortable with it, we have to understand how hard our autistic children, teens, and adults are working to navigate this environment that we have created that's maybe not such a good fit. And so what that looks like is, just that turn taking, right? The kid who may be the verbally proficient kid, and they just keep talking and talking and talking about their favorite thing. I can attest to that. But they're not letting the other person have a turn, right? Or when the other person comes to their turn, they walk away because they're done, right? I've told you what I need to say. I'm out. That's it. I'm finished. So, those are some things that we see. That's what it looks like. Those social emotional challenges, right? That's that response to the girl who doesn't want to like you, or the response to maybe making a request and wanting to be first, and then there's a meltdown, right? Because not really understanding that social emotional component, but there's a lot of underlying that goes along with that in regards to sensory as well. Repetitive body movements, right? There's a really great video that I posted on my Facebook group, and it is an autistic woman who was driving a long distance to visit her parents, and she was getting sort of overloaded, and she needed to stem, and she needed to release, and she needed to regulate. And so she stopped in a parking lot, and she did these repetitive behaviors that helps her regulate. And if you watch the video, you can see how this is just, she's really dysregulated. And then as she is doing these repetitive body movements, stemming, she is coming and getting more regulated, and her system is organizing. And she needed that. And she did the video and posted the video with the message of, this is what I need to do, and I can be an independent autistic adult and drive on my own to visit my parents and live on my own away from my parents, but I still have sensory needs, and this is something I may need to do, and this needs to be accepted, right? I need to not have the police called because I look like I am a mental instability, right? Those are the things that we need to understand and start realizing and accepting, because when we allow that, when she's able to do that, instead of the teachers saying, sit down, stop, now she can go on with her drive. She's able to live independently because she has that coping strategy to regulate, and that sensory component is so important. So those are things of what it looks like, right? That sometimes is hard for us to watch because it's different, right? It may be awkward. Children may think it's weird, but when we talk about it, just like in today's times, we talk about race, then it's not so mucky, right? If we just have those conversations and have dialogue. And yes, there is a balance. There is definitely a balance. Those ritualistic behaviors, those are things that we perceive as ritualistic, but they are coping strategies that are necessary for an autistic individual to sometimes navigate the environment. This is one of my favorites. This is becoming my new pet peeve in terms of narrow interest, and how we are determined, and I say we, let me not say we, how a lot of times educators, therapists, parents, just because we're still learning, um, are concerned about a narrow interest, right? Well, they only want to talk about trains. They only want to talk about the weather. They only want to talk about the moon, or whatever it is. When we have a child diagnosed with autism, it's considered this narrow interest. It's considered, oh my gosh, it's a restrictive interest. We've got to break this perseveration. But then we look at the little girl who is not diagnosed with autism. Everything in her room is princess. She has a princess dress, a princess bedroom. She has princess toys. Everything for Christmas is princess. No one calls her interest narrow. They just say, oh my gosh, she loves princess. And everybody gets her something princess. And that is something to think about. Now, I do understand that sometimes the perseveration is a difficulty in terms of getting kiddos to maybe do their math homework, right? But I have strategies for that, right? Using their interest, using something that they are willing to engage in. Really simple example, I had a kiddo, trains was his thing, and he would not do his reading sight words. So I made sight word cards with train cars. And then he was able to make a train with the cards, and he said his sight words. Done. We just have to present information the way our children can understand it, the way they can process it, but also meet them halfway. We have to do things a little differently, and that's okay. I'm actually hoping that uh, the more we're learning about autism and pushing for acceptance in the schools to teach our children differently, and in special education, that we also look at our children who are not under an IEP and how all children learn differently, right? It's just that autism, it's a very specific way in terms of presenting information for a lot of our kiddos. But everybody doesn't learn the same way. We just don't. The resistance to change. The resistance to change varies, of course, and that has to do with just not only just in terms of autism, but it has to do with your underlying temperament, right? Just because you are an autistic individual doesn't mean you don't have an underlying personality that goes along with that. I have families that have siblings or twins, and they're both diagnosed with autism, and totally different personalities. It's not necessarily the autism that is, presenting or facilitating the resistance. It's just, that's just who they are. They're naturally stubborn. If they didn't have autism, they would still be stubborn. But we just have a couple of extra layers in regards to communication and addressing sensory needs. So that resistance to change can be tough, really, really tough. And that's where strategies using visuals, sensory regulation, comes into play. Knowing your child and what works for your child helps as well. And as a teen and an adult who is autistic, for them to know, right? If anyone is watching this and you are also an autistic individual, it's important to understand what works for you. I have many autistic adults that reach out to me for resources, for visuals, for sensory strategies, because they're still learning about themselves, right? We're getting more access to information, and it's great. It's really a good thing. I know that technology and internet has some negatives, but there's some really good stuff coming out of it. All right, motor planning and coordination. This is the part that is under addressed. I don't know if that's a terminology, but these are the things that I want you to note in terms of this is what it looks like. And then if you see this in your child, in yourself as an autistic individual, if you see this in, maybe your adult child who is an autistic individual, ask about, ask the school, ask the therapist to maybe do an evaluation. These are our kids that struggle with transitioning. It's really easy for someone who has motor planning that's efficient to transition from an email to a text message, right? But for someone who's really struggling with that, that's where that transitioning difficulty comes into play. Difficulty completing those tasks, right? Following verbal directions, difficulty with handwriting. And I know we keep pushing and pushing and pushing handwriting. And I get it. But the grand scheme of life, Handwriting is no longer a job skill. And when I talk to parents and when I'm coaching parents, I am not saying we should not learn to write our name. I am saying we have the benefit of technology for anyone who has motor planning, fine motor, motor coordination difficulties. Technology is our best friend. And a child can demonstrate writing a paragraph by typing it in a keyboard. They don't have to demonstrate it with writing if that is a motor planning coordination struggle or challenge for them. It's about what can we do to help our kids, support them, and to show us what they know. And I am all about job skills, all about job skills. Keyboarding is a job skill. But when you have a kiddo who's struggling with handwriting, um, think about, has their motor planning been addressed? Has the OT done a really good evaluation? Because it is not necessarily that they don't or they won't, they can't. So we need to think about that. Challenge is riding a bike, right? And interestingly enough, the scooter is a little bit easier, but riding a bike requires motor planning and bilateral coordination and a lot of other things to be in place. That impact on executive functioning, which is another webinar, but the executive functioning is just that ability to execute a task, right? To execute a function, right? So for me to execute, my brain is telling my hand to pick up this cup and I can take a sip of water and I've executed it because my system is working efficiently, right? For our kiddos, that can be a challenge. And this is where, hopefully you all are starting to see the concept of the spectrum, right? It's not like it's this, it's not this. It's just like there's a spectrum of things that we need to look at for each individual. And one of my favorites is the sensory processing component, right? That sensory processing, that refers to the way our nervous system receives those messages and senses and then turns them into appropriate motor and behavior responses. And that behavior responses, right? That's the part that we struggle with in terms of that, oh my gosh, my child is doing this. And we have to look and see, is that a response based on their sensory processing? The integration is not working as efficiently. And the sensory processing disorder, which is something that you can go to an occupational therapist for to get an evaluation. This is because the sensory signals, they're either not giving the message or they're not organized, right? And so what that looks like is, this neurological traffic jam, literally, that is preventing one message to get to the destination, and therefore the child responds inappropriately, right? Because the message they've received, it's too loud. So that's their response, even though it may just be a really soft voice, right? The message they're receiving is not the correct message, or it hasn't gotten there yet because there's a traffic jam. You also will see that difficulty processing and acting upon information in terms of, something simple like, this sponge, someone doing this, that may be something that a child cannot process, right? Their system's not giving the information. Someone touching you from behind or someone coming to hug you and you're not ready to receive that sensory input, or you're not processing or not regulated enough to receive that. And then you just do this, right? Your kiddos are, or we perceive it as they don't like to be hugged. That's not necessarily true. Or as old grandmas say, I shouldn't say old, as grandmas say, he just wants to hug when he wants to hug, right? Well, yeah, and so do I, right? I don't really care for folks coming up to hug me when I'm not expecting or ready. But it is partly, yes, they only want to hug when they want to hug, but it is based on when they are ready to receive the information. Or if they're needing some proprioceptive input, then they will come and hug you, squeeze you really tight, and then they're getting their sensory needs met. So that's another reason. The other thing that you will see, and this is not talked about in terms of our kids, in school, that motor clumsiness, that, behavioral problems, anxiety, depression, all of this can be a result of the sensory processing system not working efficiently, and no one is doing anything to help. They're not getting the support they need. So this is what we see in our schools, right? This is why our kids are tagged as a behavior problem, or they're tagged as emotionally disturbed, which clearly you can tell that is, it doesn't sit very well with me. It's very frustrating, and it's very frustrating because I find that um, schools specifically will classify our young, especially our young Black males and girls, with emotional disturbance instead of autism. And we need to know, and we need to understand, and that's why I want parents to be educated, because I want parents to know there is a difference. I want parents to understand and ask those questions and push back if their child has an autism diagnosis from a medical doctor and then the school wants to classify them as emotionally disturbed. I want you to have that information to be able to fight that if you feel like it's something that needs to be sort of pushed back on, because it's very, very common for our kids to be tagged with the wrong classification in the schools because of this, because no one's looking at this, right? A lot of kids ADHD label, they really have sensory processing, they have a combination of both. There's kind of an overlap. Those are the things that we need to look at when our kids are really struggling. I say all the time, I do not believe that children wake up to go to school to not participate. If children can, they will. Yes, children will be children. Yes, children will test the system. Yes, children will try to get away with. Adults do the same. I mean, every one of us has tried to, sneak out of work early if you can to avoid traffic. If you can get away with it, why not? But children are not just wanting to not do because they just don't want to do. If they don't want to do, it's because they can't, and we need to support them. So that's why I like doing these webinars. That's why I want everyone to get as much information. And that is why I want everyone to understand and start to discover that autism covers a spectrum of differences. And this is a visual that an autistic individual made to help us understand the spectrum in terms of, the truth is someone who is neurodiverse in some areas of their brain will also be no different to the average person, right? You see autistic individuals look more like this in terms of these are the things that can be impacted, but it looks different for every person. And it's not, they have great motor skills, high functioning perception, everything's going. Nope. It can be their verbal, but their language is good, but their pragmatic social skills, right, is not quite maybe working for them, right, for them to be able to navigate their environment. So we have to look at all of the components in order to understand the needs of each child. And, if you're an autistic individual, to understand yourself and your needs. Just because you are autistic, I'm learning, of course, that doesn't mean that you're an expert on autism, right? You have to learn and understand yourself. And just share with you all that I actually have clients, my families, a couple of parents that are autistic individuals. They have autistic children, and they come to me because their child's needs are different than their needs. So it's different for everyone, just like all of us are different. But of course, there's extra layers. I'm not sort of taking away from the impact and the difference if you have an autism diagnosis. So just to let you all know, autistic individuals still need a little bit of guidance and education, sometimes for themselves, but a lot of times for their own children. I actually have a mother that I'm working with in Australia. She's out spectrumed, and some of you who are listening may have the same scenario and dynamic in your family, but she's married to, her husband is autistic and her daughters are autistic. And so she is sort of like the non-neurodivergent, I guess, in the household. And her daughters are teenagers, so it's uh, challenging times to say the least, but she has a lot that she has to navigate because they're each different and they each have different needs. All right, so with that said, of course, I could just talk forever about autism because I love to educate and it's my favorite topic. But if you would like to learn more, you can submit questions in the comment section. I think we might have some time for questions. And if you'd like to even learn more, you can go to my website. I will say that I am relaunching my website every April. I do something new for my business. This is year 5. It's exciting. And, I have an Instagram. I'm not a YouTuber, but I post things on YouTube just for parents to get some ideas and some strategies, and just to sort of educate and empower anyone who wants to be empowered. My heart is with parents. Yes, I love working with educators as an educator myself, but I think it's very important for parents to know. I think that parents can be their child's expert. I think parents have a lot of power. They just need to know their power. They need to know what they can do. And that's what I wake up every day to do, is to help parents to know, right? Empower. Because if you're empowered, then you know what your child needs, you know what to advocate for, and then you teach your child what they need, and then they learn to advocate for themselves as they grow older. All right, that is the conclusion of my presentation. However, I have to share a story. Do I have time to share a story, LaTanya, really quick?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
I have to share this story in terms of this photo. So I have to tell you that the story behind the photo is, I was on Instagram and I came across this photo and I was just obsessed with having to find it. Like, I need to find it. Who did this? Where did this come from? Tracked it down. It was illustrated by a young woman in the UK, and she is autistic and she illustrates. And I reached out to her and said, do you have a print of this? Like, I really, really want a print of this. I just have to have this in my office. And she said, would you like the original? I'm like, oh, I'd love the original. And then we worked it out and did all the transaction. And so now I have the original that I'm going to get framed. But then I reached out and said to her, I really, really like it. Can I what can I do to get permission to use this for my website? Because I really love this. And she just said, you can have it. So here it is, and it's on my website. And I just love it because all play is appropriate. Sorry, LaTanya. We have to let our children be who they are. All right, that's it. I'm done, LaTanya.
Thank you so much, Stacy. We appreciate all this information you share with us. And I also see someone in the comments that are saying they love this last slide with the picture on there. All
No.
play is appropriate. I think we have to get beyond the almost judging of how we see kids do things and what we think of how it should be done, and go to how they learn and teach them how they learn to make sure they're successful. But I do have a question myself personally. But when my son was diagnosed, it was the spectrum. Like, okay, he's on the spectrum. And more recently, you are hearing, well, my child is a level 2 and my child is a level 3. So I know you talked about this at the beginning, but can you explain the difference with the levels? And then is there a point where a child may switch from one level to another, or do they stay in that level the entire lifetime?
All right. So I love that you asked that question, because we want the levels and we want to not think about the levels. And the reason I say that is because the levels are truly necessary for services, for insurance, for a diagnosis. I get it, right? Like, I get it. Like, there's always logistics around numbers, just like standardized testing in the schools. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't think it really means a lot, but it's something that's necessary because we have to have something to show whatever it is we're trying to show. So when we think about the levels, there are criteria to say what level a child falls into. The reason that we are, or I am, should I say, talking about, and wanting you to see this in terms of looking at it as a spectrum, is because I want that mindset and that frame of thinking to go away for parents, because it's very hard to see your child and I'm speaking in terms of like new diagnosis, right? Like, you get a new diagnosis. And when you're looking at a 2, as a parent, you're just like, oh, I just need to get to a 1. I need to get to a 1. I need to get to a 1. And you're so busy looking at that concreteness of levels, you're missing that it's really just a spectrum of skills. Let's see what my child has that does really well. Let's see where they're struggling, and let's support them with those struggles, right? And in the level 2, level 1, getting from one to another is not really necessary for someone to be a productive, independent adult, right? There are children that have been diagnosed with level 3 that are, they're now in college. I mean, I have a student that was diagnosed with level 3. It's not that she went up to a level 1. It's that the levels don't really indicate or dictate where you are, because you don't stay. There's no definitive. And if you think about it, LaTanya, if you think about it, am I saying LaTanya or LaToya? Sorry. I have 2 LaTanyas in my head. Sorry. LaToya.
No, it's LaTanya. You were correct.
Okay. If you think about it, when you first bring your child, especially if they're younger, right? And they're not talking, or they're stimming. Well, it's a level 3. Oh, it's a level 3. So then parents are like, oh my gosh, they're level 3. They're so severe. They're so severe. No, they just haven't had any intervention. We don't even know what they can do. We're just learning, right? So there's a purpose, and I'm saying this because it's still like, I still have to work on it, right? Because I understand the purpose of the levels, but the levels don't really communicate what autism is, right? It's really just for the purposes of logistics. It is really about the spectrum. And when if you ever get a chance, and some of you I'm sure have, taken advantage of this wonderful social media platform we have where, autistic individuals are speaking and they're explaining how they feel. They're talking about, what autistic individuals want, feel, need, what they wish, the teacher had done. So thinking in terms of, and the reason I like that you asked the question is because when I work with my families, I want them to not look at a number. I want them to look at their child and what their child can do, and how can we support what they're struggling with, right? What do we need to do to support them? I actually sometimes think of it in terms of GPA, right? Not that I think having a high GPA is a bad thing, but when I think about, leaving college, no one ever asked me what my GPA was when I went for a job. Nobody ever asked me. Now, of course, if you're getting into med school or law school or whatever, I understand that there's a need for it, just like there's a need for the numbers and the levels for insurance purposes. But I'm really trying to help parents see the spectrum component and not get stuck on the levels, because it really doesn't mean anything in regards to what your child can do now, can do in the future, can do when they become an adult. It really doesn't. But it's hard when you look at a number. I mean, anyone who's, I'm not sure, I can't see how many folks are out there listening, but, I'm sure that there are parents who are going to see the replay, and anyone who's listening now. As a parent, and this is why, as a speech therapist, it was so important for me to connect with parents and communicate with my parents. It's hard to watch a parent get a piece of paper and it says low, can't, below, average. That is so disheartening, right? It's like, oh my gosh, the IQ is below 70, which I forgot to mention that autism is not an intellectual delay, which, I think most of us are aware of that. We're still educating, but that's not a part of autism, right? You can have autism and an intellectual delay, but it's not part of an autism diagnosis. So it's important for me, for parents, when parents get a piece of paper and feel defeated, it's hard to feel that you can do anything. It's hard. So we have to be able to show paper, push that aside, and let's talk about your child. Let's talk about what your child can do. Let's talk about what we can do to help them do the things that they're struggling with. And let's talk about the things that we may want to work on that really don't matter in the grand scheme. Like, and I know I'm going to get pushback for this, and I love pushback, but tying your shoes is not a job qualification criteria unless you work at a shoe store.
Thank you.
Shoe store people have to tie shoes. We have options for shoes. We have all these wonderful shoelaces that the athletes are using. I don't even know if the athletes tie their shoes anymore. But we have to think about what are the things, what are the skills we want to build? What is the support we want to provide, like slip-on shoes, shoestrings that tie with that clamp push button. There's so many things now that we can do.
I'm so glad that you're hitting on these points because serving as a school counselor in the school system, I see the defeat in the parents' eyes. I felt it personally when you go into a meeting and the first part of the IEP meeting is presenting the results, and
Yes.
all you hear is below, 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 or they're performing 2 or 3 grade levels
Yes.
behind everyone else. And I
Mhm.
had to personally advocate for my child because they're telling me he works on this level, but I can put him in the general ed setting with his one on one and he can complete the work. It may not be at the speed as
Yep.
everyone else in the room, but
Yep.
he can get it done. But if I had listened to what the test results said and guided him by the test results, he
Yeah.
wouldn't be near as
Yeah.
far as what he is now.
Yeah.
And we just had a conversation about it's a guy that did a video and he talks about like I may not know how to tie my shoes or still have trouble buttoning a dress shirt like the
Yeah.
buttons. And he just finished his doctoral program. Like, but he can't tie his shoes. So
Exactly.
I just think that's awesome how you just connected that together.
Thank you. There are two young men that are nonverbal in terms of they have apraxia as well as autism. And those young men communicate via technology, alternative communication device, and they are both in college becoming engineers. It's all
So the
about,
potential is there. It's
yeah,
there. We just
we
need
just have to
people to open
provide.
their minds.
Well, we have to open our, I know it's hard. It is so hard for parents to realize that their child may not be verbally proficient, but there are so many ways to communicate
Mhm.
with individuals, and even, verbal autistic individuals sometimes use backup with AAC device. I will say, be the first one to say that most of my friends who are autistic, they will much prefer to communicate via text message because they can really, really proficiently communicate. There's a lot to communicating verbally. I mean, from a speech therapist perspective, I remember my first speech 101. And when they explained what goes on in our brain, our body, and everything to actually say hello, I thought, wow, that's amazing that we can actually do that, right? And that separates us from I guess the animals who maybe can't articulate the same way that we articulate, but they do communicate in different ways. But yeah, we have to. I will say that, and I don't know if I'm going to see this. While I'm still, as my grandma would say, my eyes are still open. But I would like to think that in the future, education is more individualized for all children, and we are our neurodivergent children, or should I say our neurodivergent learners, our autistic individuals can go to school, and the strengths that they have, that's what we focus on and build for them to become a productive adults. Remember when we used to, I'm probably older than you, but we used to have like shop class. Everybody is not, we all have to do different things. And now it's, when the No Child Left Behind, all of a sudden, everybody's got to go to college. I'm like, no, everybody doesn't need it. Even the person who has a 4.0 is not necessarily college material. So we all have to realize that, we have different minds, different brains, different skill set, and we don't all have to know everything.
Yes. And we push college so hard on our students. We have the College Awareness Week and everything's focused on college. And
Yeah.
it really opened my eyes when I ran into an old student
Mhm.
and he was so excited to see me. And then he said, Miss Winfrey, I'm sorry I didn't go to college. I'm just a photographer. And I'm like, but
Yeah.
you're enjoying and loving what you do and making great money off
Mhm.
of it.
Yeah.
And
You
I
are.
felt bad because I gave you that perception that college was the only option.
Ah,
So
yeah.
now I reevaluate and we
Mhm.
do focus on college and
Yeah.
career
Yes.
because I want them to see more options that are
Mhm.
out there for them. But we've pushed like college, 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 and people have skill sets that are not necessarily found in college.
Yeah.
So
There's
we do have another question.
oh, great.
Okay. It says, how would you approach someone who may need these resources for their child, but are not necessarily open to the idea that their child may have autism?
Yes. So that is a tricky one. It really just depends on your relationship with the person, because there's always a risk, right, that the person will, get really angry or really frustrated. So what I typically do, and of course my dynamic would be really different, right? I typically will maybe say things like, "Oh, has the daycare, said any have any concerns, or sometimes I may say, have you thought about getting a speech evaluation, right? You don't necessarily have to introduce the word autism if that may be sort of something, a struggle. But I'm also a very firm believer in, if we are thinking about what is in the best interest of a child, sometimes we may have to um, risk losing or having uh, a little tension between a friend or a family member, because we have to think about the child first and not just ourselves and our needs. And I say that, now that I'm saying that out loud, you can even think of that in something even extreme, in terms of, a teacher abusing a student, or a family member, being inappropriate with a cousin, and we don't say anything because we don't want to upset the other person, but then we have risked a child, not getting what they need or being safe. And I learned a hard lesson in keeping myself quiet, because as a speech therapist, you're at the family reunion and you see, got to get early intervention, no, what do you mean early intervention? Folks get upset. But I remember I had a colleague that I worked with, and she kept saying things about her nephew, and I was like, flag for autism, flag for autism. And I'd never met the child, and didn't say anything. And I wanted to say something. I was like, oh, I haven't met the child. And Stacy, everybody is not autistic. And then when he was misdiagnosed, and there was a very unsafe scenario, I felt really bad that I didn't say to her that I suspected. I mean, I don't know if it would have changed and his mom would have been open to it, but at least I would have said. And so I called 3 people that day and said, hi, just putting myself out there, not really sure how this is going to end. Just want to let you know that I love the fact that your 2-year-old nephew knows every weather and loves to watch videos on tornadoes, but just wanted to mention a couple of things that I noticed as well. What are you doing?
Thank you. I
And
just have some noisemakers around me, so
no,
my
it's
nerves
fine.
are like.
It's perfectly fine. And I know there's no straight answer for that question, but it really is, think about, we have to think about our children over ourselves. I mean, I know it's hard. I know it's not easy. None of us like tension in family and friends, but we're at a critical point in our society right now. We all need to start getting used to having uncomfortable conversations about many things. So, you know, use your words carefully.
Yes.
Sometimes I will do things like share a video link that kind of just kind of like share it, and depending on the person, and then they start to see for themselves, and then maybe the conversation opens up. Or they can go to my website.
Thank you. And you know what? I think we also have to provide support for those parents that are about to go through that process. Like, they may see the signs that are there,
Mhm.
but just need somebody to walk through it with them.
Yeah.
Even if, like, I didn't understand what autism was, I
Mhm.
may be able to still walk with them through the
Of course,
process where they
of
can
course.
bounce ideas or thoughts. Just
Mhm.
have somebody else there to talk to.
And sometimes they just need a shoulder to cry on or somebody to scream with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you need that because life is exhausting, right?
It
Life can.
is.
I have coaching sessions where sometimes it's like 20 minutes of just mom just teary-eyed because she's just tired, or the
Mm-hmm.
school's not doing what they need to do, and not getting support from family members, which can be very overwhelming. But I do have, I have lots of resources, and maybe you and I can meet, and I can figure out a way that I can share some of the resources with your nonprofit platform so that you.
Yes, please.
Of course, of
We
course.
have a few more questions.
Okay.
Um, well, we have one comment from Latoya Pryor. Absolutely agree. I've communicated in love. Usually, the last words out of my mouth are, "It never hurts to see." The only outcome is benefits and support for the child. I like that. It never hurts to see. Just try it.
That's one
And
of that's
then we
one of
have
my
another
moms.
question. Go ahead.
That's one of my moms. One of my everything autism moms.
Awesome. Let's see. How do you manage trying to allow a child to do things independently versus jumping in to assist or communicating for them before they have a chance to do so on their own?
Oh, I like that question. All right. So to keep it simple, visual supports, and parents have to realize it's really not about them, and they just need to sit back and give more time to process. That's really hard for parents. It's really hard for teachers as well, because we feel that if we're not intervening, if we're not giving directions, then we're not parenting, we're not teaching. So visual supports help with independence. That's another training. And allowing your child time to process. So, the purpose of the visuals is because when we verbally give a direction, or we verbally say something, we don't know if all of that was retained and processed efficiently. So words disappear, right? But visuals don't. Visuals are there. And so the idea is that when you have those visual supports, then your child has the visuals to help support them with, whether packing their backpack or getting dressed for school. And the hardest part, I think, for parents is even when, they get the visual supports in place, you have to give them a little bit of time to process, and you just have to wait, be patient, but you also have to allow them to fall and make mistakes, because that is how a lot of us learn. That's what we do. We ride our bike, we go on the ramp, we know not to go on that ramp anymore because we fell and hit our knee, right? But if our mom keeps saying, don't go on that ramp, we just want to go on the ramp, right? Want to go like you have to learn. You touch the hot stove, you say, oh, okay, not going to touch that anymore, right? We learn that quickly at age 1 or 2. When I grew up, I grew up in the age where you were outside the backyard and your parents, you were in the street until the street lights came on. So nobody even knew what you were, exploring or, but now it's different. Like we kind of hover over our kids, but, give them time, give them visual supports, or provide visual supports, allow that time for them to process, but it's okay to make it's okay for them to make a mistake. It really is okay. The world doesn't fall apart. It doesn't.
We have another one.
All right.
Josephine, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Aguacho, what intervention or therapy did you find most helpful? And what resources are there to help with potty training?
Ooh, all right. So I am just going to say I am a huge, huge advocate for speech therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, because you have got to help your child develop a method of communication, and you need to address the sensory needs and make sure that all the fine motor is addressed. When you do all of that, if you have behavior here, behavior there, yes, you can do some behavior intervention because oh, okay, it's not this, it's not that. We've worked on that. But I will tell anyone, I work with families all over the world, and a lot of families don't have access to therapy. or schools that can take their children, or schools that even take children with special needs. I work with a dad in Libya, a mom with Pakistan. There are no schools for kids with special needs. And I am a full believer. It is what I do in terms of, or should I say, why I do what I do. I think that parents becoming empowered makes the most significant impact. I have worked with many, many, many children over the last 35 years, but specific to autism 20 plus years. And when I see the children that I worked with 20 years ago, when I was trying to find information, that was before Google and cell phones, just to let you all know, and those children are now doing and being who they are supposed to be in this world because their parents did the work. They didn't have a therapist to go to. They didn't have, now they had Miss Stacy when they were younger, but they didn't have, this special clinic, this special school, this special, program. Their parents learned what their children needed and they did the work, and that made a huge difference. So I do believe that therapy is very beneficial, but I believe that the right therapy is beneficial. I believe that parents have a right to know what their child needs because they should choose a therapist that understands and knows autism, not just any therapist, because that's important. Speech therapy for a child who is autistic is different than speech therapy for a child who is not. And I'm telling you, parent empowerment makes a difference. You can be your child's expert. I'm not saying you have to do it all. I'm not saying that you can't get therapy, but it is the one common denominator in all of the children I know that I have seen grown up over the past 20 plus years. And hopefully I live long enough to see the ones that I have now that are a little grow up and get.
Yes. Now, one more question. What about I had a parent reach out this week. What
Mhm.
would you suggest for parents where there's multiple children in the home?
Mhm.
How do they give the child with autism the attention that they
Mhm.
need to assist them and still give attention to the other children, but
Yes.
also teach them how to interact with their sibling?
Exactly. And that is actually what I do in my parent coaching with parents. I help parents not only understand their child, but I help parents implement strategies in a practical way that works for the dynamic of their family because every family is different. I get everyone involved. I've gone to homes and had all four siblings, including the 3-year-old, and everybody has a part in the sensory. Somebody else is in charge of making sure the visuals are put up. It is a team effort. And I do understand that as parents, I have 2 children of my own. Neither of my children are autistic, but I do, as a parent, I understand what it means to parent, and how we feel responsible for making sure all of our children feel whatever we want our children to feel. um, and the reality of it is we are given whatever life gives us, right? Whether it's a parent who is chronically ill, whether it is a person in the family with a disability, whether it is one parent, 2 parents, multi-generational family household, there's usually someone who needs a little bit more. And that's okay. That's just part of being a family. And I think if we're open about it, if we're open about, you know what, I know it feels like I spend a lot of time with your brother or a lot of time with your sister. Why don't we come up with what you would like to spend time and do with me? Spend that, find that once a week. I have a mom that, she the child that is not autistic, she has a ice cream date with her once a week, just the 2 of them, 30 minutes, that's it. Little things that you can find. Children don't need a lot of our time. In fact, I think children are getting maybe too much of our time these days because we don't send them out to play and they're not really learning to problem solve, right? Because we're there all the time. And this is just, in general, the way our society is. And I understand why. I mean, I understand why we've shifted that way. But I do think that it is what it is. It is what it is. It is what it is. If when my cousin was, unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, we all had to shift our lives, right? It is what it is, and we have to work together, and we have to figure out what we can do to pitch in for the sake of our family unit. And we all need to be open with what we need, right? So if you need, one-on-one time with me, let me know. If you need, to not have, whatever responsibility, we can talk about it. But the bottom line is, we all have to pitch in, and not one person should be doing the cleaning, the garbage, and everybody needs to pitch in to run the household. And yes, you may feel like you're not getting enough. Yes, you may feel, oh my gosh, I can't believe. Just be honest about it. Have family meetings. I have a lot of families where we do family meetings to talk about it. And it just is what it is. I mean, it really is. We all come into the world in whatever situation we are brought into, and we just have to figure out what we can do to work together. And everybody has a woe is me story. Everybody who has siblings can say, oh my gosh, my sister was the favorite, or and I'm not saying there's not a reality to it. I understand the reality of it's very time consuming. um, but I encourage my families to sit with the other children and ask each of them, just tell me, what would you like for me to do with you that would make you feel, or just what would you like to do, just the two of us? Like, I have a mom, she just does, what she does is she puts her daughter to sleep, and then with her son, they have 20 minutes of storybook time. He gets to stay up 20 minutes later because that's their one-on-one time. And he's fine, because she's really busy, working on communication and all these other things. Be honest, have family meetings, ask kids what they want and what they'd like to do with you, or if they want one-on-one time with you. And I also do a lot of teaching siblings what they can do. A lot of times, and I am watching the time, I don't know how much time we have, but I see that we're almost at 1:45. But I will say, a lot of times siblings do want to support their other sibling who is diagnosed with autism. They just don't know what to do. And that's why, if parents learn what they can do, then they can delegate some of those things. And I have to be honest, my older girl siblings, like the big sisters, they are the best at implementing the visuals. They are on it. They make sure that visual schedule is loaded every morning. They make sure it's loaded every afternoon. And they are making sure that, I have the kids laminate and cut. I'm like, mom doesn't have to do it all. And dad can cut. Mom, you laminate. When dad get home, leave the scissors in the bucket and say, cut these like, everybody, let's go. We have to get it done. It is what it is.
I think it's the same in a school setting. Like when my son transferred into a new school his first grade year, it's
Mhm.
kind of the kids couldn't understand, like, why does he do this and why
Mhm.
does he do that, and can
Mhm.
he play with us? Is he
Mhm.
okay running around doing this?
Mhm.
And they did have an awesome autism team come in. They
Oh, good.
read a book with the class. He wasn't in the room when they did it, but and at the end of the story, it was like, do you know anyone that's like this character in the book? And then they learned how to interact with him. And the next year, they did it with his entire grade level.
Good.
So that was the best. I think those were the best of his years
Mhm.
as far as social interaction with his peers, because they had been taught about how he works and
Yep.
explain things like, where the teacher said, I can't get on the computer, but he's over there on the
Mhm.
computer,
Exactly.
but it's a
Exactly.
different accommodation. So it opened their eyes up to a lot.
Yeah. And
We have
that's
another one.
that's the way we're going to make changes, by educating. Children are much more open to new ideas than adults are.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
All right, what you got?
Can school-based therapy through early childhood special education programs for autism suffice? That's for parents with transportation or time barriers to go to the clinic.
So I will say, when I was a speech therapist in the schools, we did clinic style speech therapy. That is no longer the way speech therapy is provided in the schools. It's very different now. Related services are, um, it's just different. It's very different. I do not feel that school-based therapy is enough. I encourage families, if they can, to think about how they can either make some changes. And I know that's not always possible. I mean, I have a mother in New York that literally lost her job and is in a homeless shelter because she brought her child to therapy, but it was important that her child get therapy. And so that was, unfortunately one of the consequences of that situation temporarily, but um, good therapy is hard to find. um, and I do think bad therapy is damage to children. I don't think that any therapy is better than no therapy. But you can't always find the best therapy, but you want to find good therapy. And that doesn't mean you have to always find an expert, therapist. Sometimes therapists just haven't had a reason to learn more. So you can say, you know what, my child really loves working with you. I feel like maybe, is there any way that we can, you can get more training around autism? I can find resources, and that's how I work with a lot of therapists that my families have where I help them develop their knowledge on autism because, they just never had a reason to know, or they didn't know what they needed to know, or that they needed to know anything different. Uh, the school-based therapy is it's good. It just depends on the therapist, of course. But I encourage all of my families to keep private therapy as long as possible, even if that means 2 or 3 days a week they leave school, because the early foundational period before age 7, that's when you want to make sure you get their fine motor skills. You don't want to wait till they're in 5th grade and then say, oh my gosh, we didn't have time to work on whatever, midline crossing, or all these things. And then now they're just treading water in school, and it's just really frustrating. But I do know that that's not possible for all families. So I will go back to, when you are empowered, there are things you can do at home. All of my parents, when I work with parents, I provide them with activities and strategies to build fine motor skills, midline crossing. I consult with colleagues of mine who are occupational therapists. I consult with other speech therapists because I no longer work as a speech therapist, but there are lots of things that parents can do at home, and parents really do have the power. They just need the tools. So if you can't get to private therapy, like I said, my parents in places that have no access, they are doing the work. And if you ask any of my parents, if Latoya is still there, Ms. Pryor, she will tell you I am very practical. I want parents to be able to implement. And so I don't want it to be where you have to get all this special equipment. We do things around the house. If you look at any of my videos, it's all simple, practical things you can do around the house, but they build skills. And a lot of it is stuff that you do anyway. You just don't realize you're building a skill. And so I encourage you to do it more, right? Because you didn't realize that you could be, it's beneficial.
And this will be our last question.
All right.
But before we take the last question, I do want to tell our viewers that we have a Facebook page and a Facebook group. So our group is more so if you have any follow-up questions for this. And Stacy, I'll add you to that group as well.
Perfect.
But they can ask questions, and then members of the group try and provide answers for them.
Perfect.
So great. Our last question is from Misha Turner Rowland, which was one of our presenters on our first virtual series. How can you tell the difference between your child choosing not to listen because of the need to challenge boundaries versus if something is an autism issue?
You guys have great questions. All right, so sometimes you can tell the difference and sometimes you can't, but how you can tell the difference is, I am a firm believer in closing all of the loopholes. So I think of all the loopholes. So if I'm setting a boundary, I have the visual support, I've got the timer, I've made it very, very clear that this is what, I've set them up for success. I gave them sensory regulation activities, 45 minutes to an hour before the activity, so I know they're at their optimal regulation. So if a parent or a teacher provides the sensory regulation, the visual supports, the parameters, the boundaries, everything is visually communicated in a way your child processes, because visuals look different for each child, even within one household or one classroom, then you can say, okay, so all of this is provided, and we're still not getting, so let's look at the possible behavior function behind it, right? And what's interesting is, and I have these really great dialogues with ABA therapists in regards to the function of behavior. And I like to sort of, uh, it's always interesting how if the function of the behavior, let's say, is escape, right? Usually the scenario I can bring back to, oh, they're escaping because of the sensory. Oh, they're escaping because the fine motor. Oh, they're escaping. So it's not escaping because I just want to escape. I get it. We know the function. Now, why? Why? Why are they not walking into that grocery store? Because it is overwhelming and we just can't go there. It's really hard for parents when I have to, because I'm always very honest. And they're like, oh, I really want them to go to Sunday worship, and I'm like, okay, we're going to put that on the table. I know it's important to you, but you have a 3-year-old with sensory processing challenges. We have got to get some regulation in place, and then we can transition to going to. So shift out with dad. You guys take turns. We have to make adjustments temporarily sometimes to get to the long-term end result of being able to do that task. Parenting is unpredictable. Life is unpredictable, but parenting is shifting everything before we became a parent. So that is my way of determining whether or not it's just, that's just the child. And, of course, your children, parents know their children, we can tell when it's just personality or if it's just, and the reality of it is there are lots of things that I don't like to do, right? That I would love to say, I don't want to do that. And I say that a lot. You can ask anyone in my family. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Right now, I'm an adult. I have a choice. And there are lots of things that I have to do that I don't want to do that I do. But I communicate that, right? I'm able to communicate and express that. For our children, it's hard for them to communicate. And sometimes they don't even know what the reason is. They don't know how to say, I'm sensory dysregulated, right? They don't know how to say, I'm having trouble with my executive functioning. They can't say that, right? Even if they are verbal, they don't understand that to be able to communicate. So we have to be the problem solvers in terms of looking to see and doing observations and just watching. Sometimes we just need to watch to see what they're going to do, and we can learn so much. And I will leave it at that and let you guys resonate. And hopefully that this discussion has sort of helped you to see autism from a different perspective and to see that spectrum component. And my website is here. I will say, and I think I started the sentence and knowing myself, I don't think I finished it. I am my website is under construction. It is available. There's information, but I am actually relaunching because I'm trying to make it easier for my families to access resources, training modules, and I'm trying to put it all in one place. So there are parts of it that are not completed. I'm still working on it. It's a labor of love. And I want it to look a certain way, but I didn't want to wait because there is, some of my services are available, but you can learn more about myself. And if you need to know any more, you already gave a whole, but learn more about what I can help you with is in regards to families. This was exciting. This is so much fun.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. You are like full of knowledge about autism. I love this. And I will be reaching out to you again, believe me, for future informational sessions. I appreciate this so much.
No,
We thank our viewers for sticking around with us. They had some awesome questions.
Yes.
And you received many compliments in our chat about how this has been an informative session. So we thank you, Stacy.
Good. That's what I want. Everyone to get a little bit knowledge to make you want to find out a little bit more.
Yes. And so we will just end our event today. I'm going to put up our social media handles. So you have our YouTube channel that you're on now. So you can go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do have Facebook, Happy Joseph's Journey. Our Instagram is at Joseph's Journey. Twitter, Happy Joseph's Joe 1, and our website, which you can purchase your shirt. We will be wearing them on April 2nd for Autism Awareness Day. We thank everyone for your support, and we look forward for you joining us for future events. Thank you again, Stacy, for your
Welcome.
participation today. We appreciate everything that we learned during this session.
Good.
You
Thank you.
all have a great day and get out and enjoy your weekend.